And the YouTube also, you start the YouTube?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, it is. So we start. Okay, welcome everybody. We continue with our second session for today. And you can notice that we will have a translation online, French, English, and Spanish. You can choose. I would like to present you our keynote speaker, Gili Traganou. She will present embodied infrastructures, prefigurative politics as acts of dissenting with things. Gili is an architect, professor of architecture and urbanism at Parsons School of Design, the new school in New York, and co-editor-in-chief of the journal Design and Culture. She's author of Designing the Olympics, Representation, Participation, Contestation, Routledge 2016, and the Tokaido Road, Traveling and Representation in Edo and Meiji, Japan, Routledge Corson 2004, an editor of Design and Political Dissent, Routledge 2020, and Travel Space Architecture, co-edited with Miodrag Mitrasinovic, Ashgate 2009. Her current work focuses on the role of space, maintenance, and materiality in prefigurative politics. We will show his presentation.
Her presentation.
Her presentation, sorry.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gili Traganou, and today I will talk about collectivity in design through the case study of embodied infrastructures. My presentation will include three different acts. The first at the Occupy Wall Street, the second at the Crinham Common in the UK, and the third at Christiania Freetown in Copenhagen, Denmark. All these acts are from prefigurative spaces, and what I will claim is that embodied infrastructures are key agencies for the type of political work they do. So let's begin with the Occupy movement.
I've come here to run my sport. I've come here to run my sport. Offer my solidarity. Offer my solidarity. For this unprecedented display. For this unprecedented display. A popular and democratic will. A popular and democratic will.
It is 2011, and we are at the Washington Square Park, several blocks away from Zuccotti Park, where the Occupy movement began. The words of Judith Butler reverberate through the bodies that are assembling the square. Having first appeared in the anti-nuclear movements of the 1980s, the People's Mic re-emerged in the Zuccotti Park and soon became emblematic of the Occupy movement culture and the participatory nature of its assemblies. Occupiers used the human mic to resist the enforced silence of the New York state law. The People's Mic is defined by media theorist Marco de Seri as the collective amplification of individual voices in public gatherings. Its embodied, slow-paced, and choral nature is an antidote to the speedy and fragmentary nature of online communication. From a design perspective, the People's Mic is an embodied sociostatic distribution of communal declaration that does not rely on high technology. It is as low-tech as it can get, based on people's bodies and volition. It amplifies a voice in an inherently collective and participatory manner. And it does so without coercion, since any participant can opt out at any time, human mic does not separate between production and consumption. The consumers of the voice are also its producers. It bridges the expert with the non-expert and can turn any participant into an authoritative voice, a medium, and an audience at once. But what happens when one has to repeat words they disagree with? Participants in the people's mic sometimes express an uneasiness, but they still choose the people's mic with the understanding that amplification is not endorsement. It is an expression of a fundamental principle to allow all voices to be heard. With this for the series, participants undergo a level of disubjectification. Joining the mic means to occupy simultaneously several positions, embodying the collective ego instead of one's own distinct identity. Carrying an animate ontology, people's mic does the work we normally delegate to the realm of things, and specifically infrastructures. It distributes and makes a resource relatable, and yet it does not endeavor to be efficient. Relying fully on bodies that stand in union, it is an infrastructure that generates community empowerment. It is an apparatus of vigilance that vibrates through bodies, not simply in order to amplify sound, but for the sake of a fundamental belief. The people's mic encapsulates the DNA of the embodied infrastructures that I see being in the heart of prefigurative politics. Spaces of commons where versions of a desired future are being rehearsed. From my perspective, this letting go of one's subjectivity is a rite of passage to becoming a commoner or a member of a prefigurative community. What is prefigurative politics? Representing the slogan, "Be the change you want to see," prefigurative politics are forms of civic engagement that do not wait for a future change to happen. The change they enact is here and now, in the present. The word prefiguration derives from the Latin word pre, which means before, and figurare, which means to form or to shape. According to Karl Marx, prefigurative politics enact those forms of social relations, decision-making, culture, and human experience that are a movement's ultimate core. Some well-known prefigurative events, spaces are the Paris Commune, the work of the Black Panthers, the Zapatistas and the Kyrgyz Liberation Movement, Christiania Freetown in Copenhagen, and numerous other protest camps similar to the Occupy, such as the Greenham Common Peace Camp in the UK or the Standing Rock in South Dakota. The contribution of my work to the study of prefigurative politics, which is mostly conducted by social scientists, is my suggestion of framing prefigurative politics as events of radical materialism. This is exemplified by what I call embodied infrastructures, which I see as the key agency of prefigurative socio-material action. Prefigurative politics cannot exist without a radical collective engagement with materiality, which, as we saw in the human mic, overcomes some of the deep divisions enacted by professional acts of design, those between consumption and production, expert and user, humans and things, technological reliance, and social vigilance. The second act of embodied infrastructure that I want to share with you today comes from the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, another space of prefiguration. This emblematic photograph of a human chain captures the spirit of the protest camp, which was part of the anti-nuclear movement of the 1980s. It is a still from the Embrace the Base demonstration, which took place in the area known as Nuclear Valley in Berkshire, England on December 12, 1988. This human chain, composed by more than 30,000 women, paralleled the 9 miles of the fence that surrounded the US cruise missile base, an important site in the Cold War era. According to my late new school colleague, Ann Snito, a well-known American feminist who joined the camp, this was part of an ongoing protest of an inventive, leaderless, constantly rotating population of women who had blocked the smooth functioning of this base for several years. It is important to focus on the rival intentions of these two different chains, one made by women's own bodies, and the other by barbed wire enclosing the territory of the base. As Ann Snito put it, the green fence looks very serious. Thick wire mesh topped by several feet of broad barbed wire, all supported at frequent intervals by cement pylons. Inside the fence, concrete runways, small bunker-like buildings, a thriller's wasteland. This double reinforced fence is entrusted with institutional authority to keep unauthorized bodies out of the base. Its capacity to inflict injury is meant to disempower and intimidate. Like in every border, here we see a dialectic between space and counterspace. The border creates a magnetic field. It is both attracting and repelling. It evokes its awe and desire for transgression. The human chain is not entrusting objects and technologies of surveillance. It does not repel, but hugs. Therefore, its name, embrace the base. I see these women holding hands and forming a chain as material practitioners who rejected to delegate their beliefs, morality, and intentionality to technologies, and are determined to become infrastructures themselves. What is the function of this human chain beyond stopping access to and from the nuclear territory? While the barbed wire encloses a site, the human chain opens itself to an array of collective practices: collaborative cooking, art making, dialogue, practices of fluid sexual orientation. And here we see unfolding a lexicon of protest camp practices in a unique improvised manifestation within the particular natural setting. These women are experimenting with self-governments in small communities, with politics of flattened hierarchies and self-management. Meetings without podiums, spontaneous acts that can erupt anywhere without notice, the world without hierarchies of space or time. But the camp is perhaps most of all a newly devised place of inhabitation. An enigmatic version of the camp is captured by this photo. Each of the vendors are tens of individuals or groups of women who have chosen to reside next to the base, determined to stay there as long as it takes for a change to happen. To be sure, this life is not just a party, it is life in extremis. According to Snito, one lives at the camps with what can be carried away at a moment's notice. Krinam Camp forces those who live there into a naked, urgent present. The camp is a home emptied out in the mud. Hannah Arendt has written insightfully about public space in mass, using the metaphor of the vanishing table that had once coalesced people who now, after the table's vanishing, find themselves as strangers in the open. Here we encounter a different kind of vanishing. Unlike the space of appearance or the realm of the public discussed by Arendt, the space of commons emerges out of the vanished walls of the most private, the most laborious parts of the home. Once the walls of our privacy are not present, we find ourselves thrown out in the common. Citing Snito's description again, familiar domestic collages of blackened tea kettles, candles, cornflakes, bent spoons, chipped plates lie around as if the contents of a house had been emptied into the mud, but here the house itself is gone. The women have left privacy at home, and now whatever acts of housekeeping they perform are in the most public of spaces. This forceful act of breaking the walls that enclose the private world of tedious chores and taxing daily practices, the act of taking them out in the open, is not accidental or forced from the outside. All the messiness of the private world becomes visible and accentuated by the muddy commons, and this is so by intention. It is 1990, and we are in Christiania town in Hagen. During a confrontation between squatters and the police, a young bearded person in orange trousers and suspenders is sweeping Christiania Street. He does this in direct proximity with the police, who are defending their bodies with seals, seeming alert for a potential attack. The protester with the broom walks the police out of Christiania's space, while other protesters are preparing for a fight with stones and eggs in their hands. Christiania Freetown is an autonomous, self-managed district in Copenhagen of approximately 1,000 residents. It was established as a squat in 1971 in a 17th century military base, proclaimed to be the biggest opportunity to build up a society from scratch. Christiania's first inhabitants were a group of young people who had become homeless after the police dismantled their squatted buildings in the area. And here they have just discovered this new space of inhabitation. As an autonomous community, Christiania has since operated beyond the state through processes of self-government. It occupies 84 acres and is subdivided into 14 residential areas, while it is being governed by several types of assemblies, each with a different jurisdiction and concern. Political demonstrations often oscillate between talking truth to power and using violence to express rage. What is this sweeping protester doing, and what is the significance of a protest with a broom? What is the nature of the space that is being defended by the act of sweeping? I would like to consider the difference between the modality of the protester with the broom and the earlier iconic image of Christiania's protest in the 1970s. Here, angry youth attacked the fence of the now abandoned military base with a plank. But 20 years after the break into the military base, the protester with a broom signals a different type of dissent, which is often performed quietly, not in anger. Studying objects in resistance of black bodies during slavery, literary critic Josie Lamb writes, "When we face constant and urgent injunctions to speak up and speak out against oppression, and in which silence is often interpreted as political indifference, it is all the more important to broaden our understanding of the modes of resistance available to us." This form of politics, which we see at play in Christiania, does exactly that, gives voice to the nonverbal and broadens our modes of resistance. Rather than interpreting them as indifferent to real politics, acts of care and repair, when performed in common, are not simply acts of labor, but deeply political acts. The protester with the broom is a synecdoche of Christiania's self-managed infrastructures of care and repair that have been sustaining Christiania's living environment for the last 50 years. It is based on the community's determination to self-manage amenities that the rest of the citizens either take for granted, demand from the state, or purchase from the market. This includes the collective cleaning of their common space, the self-installation of their water and heat, and taking care of their children in preschool age, among a long list of infrastructures that they are committed to self-manage. The protester with the broom engages in an act of embodied infrastructures analogous to those of the people's mic and the human chain that we saw before. The act of sweeping is both specific to the daily needs of the community and for the sake of freedom from state and market control. What the protester with the broom is claiming is Christianians' non-statist ideology and their rejection of many of the entitlements that the citizens of the state enjoy. Infrastructure is an elastic word, one that runs the risk of losing its meaning, not unlike the word design. Infrastructures are both things and relations between things. They put various resources, such as materials, capital, and information, into circulation and make them relatable. These common goods, however, circulate upon an uneven terrain. Infrastructures not only connect, but also divide, segment, and dispossess. The infrastructural landscape of prefigurative spaces is reminiscent of what Frank Tonkis has named as shared infrastructural poverty. These spaces might look similar, with camps for the displaced or nomad lands. Inspired by people as infrastructure, the concept developed by urban anthropologist Abdulmalik Simon, Tonkis describes human bodies are basic carrying element of these auto-infrastructures, ramified around the ordinary labor of talking, listening, carting, pulling, sorting, caring, and waiting. In the context of stated market figures, human bodies themselves become conduits of exchange and connection. Despite their similarities, the embodied infrastructures that I am after do not come only out of necessity, but are there by intention. Even if an external imposition has led to the emergence of an embodied infrastructure, the resulting formation is adopted even in conditions when external resources are no longer deprived because of the recognition of an embedded value. What circulates and becomes relatable through embodied infrastructure is not only the resource, but most importantly, human power, sociability, democracy, and horizontality. While not fully emergent, embodied infrastructures are not fully designed either. The notions of expertise, originality, and invention that are the core aspects of creativity in professional design are precisely the values that are put under scrutiny by the process of embodied infrastructures. In prefiguration, non-expert design actors and citizen caretakers collaborate with each other and most often act in the absence of professional designers. In doing so, they gather the agency knowledge that are necessary to craft socio-material alternatives and at the same time reject the difference between labor and work. Hannah Arendt's distinction between reproductive labor and productive work is worth revisiting to comprehend the subversion that is brought by embodied infrastructures. For Hannah Arendt, reproductive labor produces consumables, while work produces durable artifacts. While for Arendt, labor is executed simply in order to fulfill certain goals, work is conducted for the sake of values that are loftier than simple functionality or sustenance. The type of labor we encounter in embodied infrastructures defies Arendt's hierarchical distinction between the two categories. On the one hand, infrastructural work, as that undertaken by the human chain or the human mind, is indeed produced through a consumable bodily labor, labor that does not create a lasting thing. Yet, this consumable labor is executed not simply in order to fulfill a certain function, but rather for the sake of a fundamental community value. And with this, it assumes a role that Arendt sees in work. This otherwise invisible labor that is valorized in space of prefiguration has been bracketed in writings by feminist thinkers as the work of social reproduction. It is most commonly undertaken by underpaid caretakers and by women at home. But here one needs to be cautious. Anne Snito alerts us not to fall for the magic femaleness as the old reverence for motherhood. The feminists of a place like Greenham Common, and by extension Christiania and other places of prefiguration, is not how early media reports celebrated these women as orderly housewives and mothers, naturally concerned about their children, innocent animals, and growing plants. As a feminist, he joined the women's liberation movement to escape this very myth of the special altruism of women and women's handy patience for repetitive tasks. Snito saw Greenham Camp as a feminist laboratory where women sought to change male power without seeking that power, where woman was a porous identity transformed by an extreme situation on the changing edge of gender. Thus, the protester with the broom, being a male Christianite, is a testament to the type of transformations that prefigurative politics subscribe to. In my presentation today, I showed 3 acts of embodied infrastructures in support of prefiguration: an infrastructure of amplification, an infrastructure of resistance, and an infrastructure of care. In closing, I define embodied infrastructures as socio-technical assemblages of humans and things acting in alliance. These vulnerable devices are in permanent need of nurturing and replenishment based on the acknowledgement of the interdependence between work and labor, humans and materiality, materiality and democracy. Embodied infrastructures are also pedagogies of collective ways of being that need to be inscribed in bodies and become a new habitus if a transformation is to happen. And I would like to end with the words of Judith Butler as they reverberated through the bodies of Occupy participants back in 2011.
Shelter. voices. Politics of the body. Requirements of the body. Requirements of the body. Movement and its force. Force.
Thank you. And I would love to have a conversation on this matter.
Thank you very much. Sorry about the quality of the recording. I appreciated the translations, the interpretations. Thank you very much for doing this. It was easier for me to follow the French and the Spanish than the English, in fact.
Thank you, Julie, for your presentation. We will have time for questions, comments. Could be through the chat or directly. Anna, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Julie or Georgia, how I should address you, Julie, very much for your talk. It's very close to my heart and my realm of interest. I was just curious of if you could develop further some of the thoughts around the relationships of the shift, because you make a passage through history, and I will exemplify a little bit better, but I was thinking of the modes of resistance, and I look at Green Commons as a very crucial step in the development of certain tactics, and that later on are very much informed Reclaim the Streets due to the notion of appropriating loopholes in the law. That's how Green Commons, they could really make the process happening. And similarly, on a different way, I think Occupied really gave the way to self-organization on community, on grassroots levels, the year after Occupied, with Hurricane Sandy hit very badly in New York, and groups such as Not an Alternative and others really were the first ones on site and could really create those sets of social relationships and organization. And then you speak of Christiana, that in a way, the man wiping the floor is a completely shift from speaking about to a single individual that very much resembles the women in red in Taksim Square in Istanbul. So we have both the mode changes of tactics, modes of resistance, but also modes of representation, and how that direct representation happens. So it would be interesting to get your views on those shifts, or what you see as relationships of, in terms of these embodied infrastructures today in relationship to where we, like say in Spain, if we wouldn't have had the occupations, the 15M movement, occupations of squares, we wouldn't have the political movements that we have seen in recent decades or other expressions. So I think it's interesting just to see how those shift and what it currently has for an impact. Thank you. I hope the question is not too unclear or too comprehensive, but I'm just so curious to hear more of your thinking. Thank you very much for your presentation again.
Thank you so much for this question. That's important for me to think also further, and I will keep thinking about it also in the next months, I believe, because I'm working on a bigger project. So this question of a historical transformation it's definitely very important to ask. I mean, on the one hand, we see a recurrence of things that happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and happening again today. So, and one sad observation is that many of the struggles that started then are not resolved. So of course, they are now in a different context, which we need to take into account. So yes, so besides focusing on the similarities and the analogies, I think it's important to look at the historical transformations. As I was looking at this, as I was putting the slides together, there were some things that occurred to me also for our reading today of what is happening right now. And I couldn't fail but notice the whiteness of the participants in most of these events that I chose to present and to discuss, which at least with our view, or at least my view today, which is informed very much from questions of decoloniality, made me question whether even the examples I chose to give were adequate. And maybe I should include in my own work case studies that come from struggles that concern also, different questions of race and new understandings of gender. And perhaps then we would see that even the means of action and the concepts that come out of them are slightly different, or maybe substantially different. So I wouldn't say that these examples have a universality, neither for the time they were produced, nor for today. And I was thinking recently about Afrofuturity and Afrofuturism in particular, where in fact, which might be seen as a case of prefiguration, but in fact, the visual languages that is being employed is exactly the opposite. We rarely see there kind of allusions to things that would appear like coming from a scarcity of resources. Actually, we see quite the opposite, exactly the opposite. So maybe your question has to do also with the similarities that the cases I chose have, but in fact, I would say that this is not indicative of the fuller range of protests that is happening these days, the fuller range of struggles that we see today. And one should really put them in the same picture and draw these comparisons. And that we will illuminate probably different aspects that were not visible right now with these three choices. Thank you again. It's a very important question. I don't know if my answer covers, but I would love to discuss it further.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would also like to talk more with you, but another time. Thank you.
Of course, yes.
Thank you, Gilly. I think that David Vanderburg has his hand raised.
Yes, I raised my hand. First of all, thank you very much, Gilly. It's very nice to hear you talk. It's very touching and it's very broad, and I really appreciate the idea, the general idea of resistance. I think it's very important, and I think it's something that we have to transmit to our students and to our colleagues. I'm curious about a thing. I don't know how you feel about this, but the question of the migrant crisis and the way that Greece is reacting to it, and the fact that several islands in Greece, like Lesbos or Lesbos in particular, have been invaded by migrants, and the Greek citizens are resisting. And then there was this this thing recently with what's she called, Little Amal, the puppet who was walking across Europe, and in Greece there were people throwing stones at her or at it. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that. I find it very difficult to, well, no, I don't find it difficult to understand, but I find it difficult to accept. And then I think also that Europe should be more accepting, should be more accommodating of the countries like Greece and Italy, who are right on the border, who are getting all the migrants, and they're not letting them go further. But this is a very complex question. But I want to know how you feel about it as a person of Greek origin.
Thank you. Yes, I definitely agree with you that this was very regrettable and horrible thing that happened. And when I saw this little Amal, I thought that, oh yeah, this is really the type of thing I'm talking about, and in relation to dissenting with things, and this kind of performativity and materiality and collectivity that were involved in putting this migrant project together as it was traveling across Europe or across the world. On the other hand, of course, you started yourself explaining why this might happen in Greece, but I would like to say Greece is a small and at the same time big country. There are so many differences among the Greeks and even among the different localities in Greece. So as there were people who were against, and they did this horrible, of course, reaction, throwing stones to this project and not accepting it, there are also other Greeks that had a very different reaction and response all these years in relation to the migrant problem. And I would side more to the second rather, of course, with the first. So yeah, I don't know much the internal politics because I don't live there for a very long time. And definitely I don't have connections, personal connections with the places that received most of the immigrants. But I could imagine that there was a very contentious situation. The same contentious situation was happening also between the NGOs. The NGOs, from what I hear, they have fight with each other about who is going to attract more migrants in order to get more funding. So there are many layers there of contention, and that bring problems add more problems to how this situation would arrive to a different kind of settlement. So there are multiple actors that participate in this process, and very difficult for me, at least from a distance, to comprehend.
Okay.
Yeah, not an answer really, but I think it's very complex.
There is a question on the
Oh, it's not a question, David. Just a message.
No, but there's a question from as the notion of care develops across all platforms and disciplines, how does this notion fit into your approach?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Can you say it again? I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it.
No, it was only sent to me actually, but it's just perhaps a mistake. As the notion of care develops across all platforms and disciplines, how does this notion fit into your approach?
Yeah, I think that this was something that I connected with my example of the protester with the broom in Christiania, where at least in these later stages of Christiania's development, which exists now for 50 years. So it is an example that we can see kind of a trajectory of how a squat or a protest camp develops. And we see that in order for this kind of forms of resistance to survive, attention to care, repair, and maintenance are of key importance. Otherwise, so there is a kind of a shift happening from this kind of sometimes more aggressive forms of protest that happen in the beginning in order to break through and get into a space. Then if you really want to maintain life in the space beyond just making a statement, then these are very, very important aspects. And where we see that it's also very complex. So for instance, in the case of Christiania, what is happening is that because of their ideological position, they really have to reject many, or they decide to reject many of the entitlements they have as citizens of the state in order to do this care, repair, and maintenance themselves. So if they really want to be out of the state, since it is mostly, at least most of them, their ideology is that of anarchism, so they should not be represented by the state, they also have to do themselves all these kinds of things that the rest of us in our daily life expect to come to us from the state. For instance, cleaning the streets and taking care of the children, taking care of their elderly, and cleaning their water, installing their own pipes, the water pipes. So there are all these kind of actions, which I see as actions of care and repair, have to happen through this kind of embodiment of the community members and serve themselves rather than being served as citizens. So it is a particular take on care and repair. And at the same time, what we see is that this becomes the most important value of being a community member, of being a Christianite. So instead of delegating this to the side, to the people who are service, everybody has to become a caretaker. Everybody has to become a serviceman or a servicewoman to their community. So there is a kind of a reversal of how we see in capitalism, this kind of labor becoming invisible and unrecognized and underpaid. There, it is the main thing that you have to perform in order to become a commoner, to become a citizen of Christianity. So definitely that's a big reversal that we see happening. We might not see it so obviously in the very early stages where people are mostly into a struggle stage, but later on it is necessary to happen. I don't know if this covers the question. I think squatters have a very similar experience. Squatters that remained in the place for many years and gained ownership and access to it.
Okay, thanks so much, Julie. Thanks a lot for your presentation, and we are on time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for the questions. It's rare for me to present it in an architecture context, so it's interesting to see the reception and reactions from an architecture group.
I will show the presentations of Nicolas Atlet and Michel Prégardien, designers as interpreters from Belgium. Then Oscar Andrade and Isadora Aubel, calculation and uncertainty, the Travesías from Chile. And Corina Dean and Maria Chiara Piccinelli, a shed at Shotwell, making, thinking, doing from UK. I present now. Oops.
La corporéité du geste musical improvisé, tout ce travail qu'il fait en amont, tout ce travail de conception, de routine, on peut le dire, peut-être on en parlera tout à l'heure, tout ça disparaît au moment où il nous rend complètement témoins de cette fabrication de musique. Alors, je ne sais pas si vous voulez qu'on développe sur...
Ah ben si, je vous en prie.
Vraiment, ça nous amènerait assez loin, mais ce qui est en tout cas très fort dans la situation, c'est cette position de témoin dans laquelle il nous met. Et c'est pour ça qu'on l'aime, parce qu'on a l'impression de créer avec lui, enfin l'histoire de la Naniplose tout à l'heure, avec le début insipide du concert de Cologne, c'est typiquement ça. Voilà, il entend quelque chose qui se passe dans l'environnement et il en fait une ressource pour son action. Isla.
donner d'abord, dans l'extrait qu'on vient d'entendre, l'anthropologue en fait se pose en faux d'une improvisation liée à la figure mythique du génie. Au contraire, Denis Laborde, au sujet du concert de Cologne, explique que c'est bien l'essence de l'improvisation de combiner savoir-faire constitué, routine personnelle issue de longs entraînements, avec le contexte immédiat. Ce qui n'enlève en rien la virtuosité de l'interprète, qui s'arrête en l'occurrence sa virtuosité pouvant s'évaluer notamment au fait qu'il reprend les notes du carillon d'entrée de l'opéra de Cologne pour débuter son improvisation. Alors, quid de l'architecture Christian Béthune nous dit que le jazz remet en perspective une vision eurocentrée qui veut que l'œuvre soit issue d'un dessin préalable de l'auteur et que cela aboutit à une perfection qui ne peut être transformée. La performance jazzistique, au contraire, ne pouvant faire œuvre selon cette vision, puisque non transcriptible par écrit. En fait, on retrouve en architecture ces deux visions de la création, en caricaturant un peu, d'un côté l'architecte artiste chef d'orchestre, et de l'autre la figure de l'artisan architecte bricoleur interprète. Dans la première figure, le concepteur s'applique à définir lui-même ses propres règles qui mèneront son projet à terme, en définissant lui-même les ressources qui vont orienter son projet. Le projet se définit alors de façon linéaire et uniforme. Tout est fait pour éliminer les contraintes qui viendraient perturber la perfection de cette création. Dans la deuxième figure, l'artisan bricoleur consiste à reconnaître les contraintes externes au concepteur, type contexte ou matérialité, et à considérer ces contraintes comme des ressources à disposition, pour imaginer à partir de là la solution qui sera la plus adaptée. Cette seconde attitude est à notre sens celle qui s'accorde le mieux aux problématiques actuelles de l'architecture et de la société en général, celle où les faits bouleversent le pensée et provoquent alors de nouveaux types de faits. À l'instar du jazz entre standard et improvisation, la conception peut s'envisager dès lors selon un principe de contrainte-ressource, avec une pratique d'interprète entre savoir constitué et savoir expérimental. Qu'en est-il de la pédagogie du projet ? On va vous montrer qu'en fait, on a essayé d'appliquer ce principe de contrainte-ressource à l'enseignement de studio d'architecture de première année. Cet enseignement qui se situe donc entre règles de base et improvisation est composé d'une approche théorique dans le cadre d'un cours ex cathedra et d'une approche pratique par projet. L'approche théorique n'a pas pour vocation d'apprendre un style d'architecture, une grammaire et un vocabulaire définis et précis, mais plutôt de mettre en évidence les thématiques principales qui traversent tout projet d'architecture, sans pour autant en conditionner l'issue. 4 thèmes principaux sont identifiés: la gravité, la lumière, la temporalité et la matière. Ces thématiques sont indépendantes de la fonctionnalité, de la forme, du lieu ou du concepteur. Elles font partie des éléments intrinsèques de l'architecture, comme pourrait l'être finalement la gamme de notes en musique. C'est avec quoi on va pouvoir jouer. Donc, dans le cadre de l'approche par le projet, on développe ces 4 thématiques initiées précédemment dans le cadre d'un projet très contraint. En fait, concrètement, les étudiants conçoivent un programme assez simple et peu défini, type lieu de loisirs, ou espace dédié à une œuvre d'art, dans un lieu assez ouvert, type parc ou place. À cela s'ajoute l'imposition de 3 contraintes majeures: une structure, une forme et une matière définie, mais qui fait l'objet d'un tirage au sort dans 3 pots séparés. Un pot structurel, avec des points porteurs, des murs porteurs, etc. Un pot forme, contenant diverses formes de base, et un pot matière, contenant la pierre, le bois, le métal ou le béton. Donc la pédagogie développée ici cherche à inverser un peu le processus ou le procédé classique en imposant largement la résolution architecturale dès le début. Mais cela oblige à se poser des questions sur l'inscription dans le contexte et la fonctionnalité. L'intérêt de la démarche étant que rien n'est forcément clair et cohérent dès le départ, même si des pans entiers du projet sont déjà définis. en fait, le processus de projet devient tout sauf linéaire. Et donc, la crainte du départ des étudiants de ne pas arriver à un résultat final, en fait, on s'aperçoit depuis 3 ans que ça donne au contraire des projets très aboutis. En fait, on s'aperçoit qu'en floutant la logique conceptuelle linéaire, les groupes d'étudiants incluent un mécanisme de pensée qui leur permet d'intégrer progressivement leurs ressources du projet et finalement de développer des solutions inattendues. Le studio devient un véritable lieu d'improvisation. En parallèle, on mène aussi une pédagogie concrète, donc pour une approche technique et sensible approfondie de la matérialité, où on cherche à tester le même procédé de contrainte ressources. Donc on l'applique à des semaines d'activités intensives transversales, notamment dans le cadre du projet Loco 21. Donc Loco 21, c'était un espace d'expérimentation de matériaux en réemploi et à faible transformation, pour réaliser des structures temporaires dans l'occupation d'une friche industrielle. C'était l'opération Imaginez votre ville sur le site des anciennes manufactures de céramique Bock à la Louvière en Belgique. Notre optique là-bas était de proposer des structures qui puissent être appropriables, mais sans programme fixe, avec comme point de départ de toute conception les matériaux disponibles sur le site ou localement. Et ceci afin de favoriser l'émergence d'une plasticité architecturale liée au processus de réalisation plutôt qu'à une forme préétablie. Il y a eu 5 workshops où on a exploré différents matériaux et on a pu distinguer dans toutes ces approches 2 principales par rapport à l'exercice de contraintes ressources. La première a consisté à réaliser une première phase de conception et de fournir aux étudiants des schèmes proposant un assemblage ou une logique de disposition d'une structure, et ensuite à charge des étudiants de s'approprier ces logiques et les capacités des matériaux fournis pour réaliser sur site avec les aléas et adaptations au site que cela présuppose. Puis, à partir de cette structure de base, ils devaient l'incrémenter de dispositifs d'usage qu'ils avaient imaginés en gardant la logique du matériau réemploi. Donc, la seconde a consisté pour les étudiants à acquérir un savoir-faire concernant la transformation de matière en matériaux aptes pour la construction, puis d'utiliser ces compétences pour expérimenter une mise en œuvre alternative en bonne intelligence avec les experts de ces matériaux présents lors des workshops. En effet, les activités se déroulaient de façon collaborative et horizontale entre les participants, qu'ils soient étudiants, experts ou enseignants. Donc, dans les 2 cas, ces essais pédagogiques visaient à faire œuvre commune à partir de contraintes arbitraires, une ou 2 matières, un schéma, etc., pour montrer à l'étudiant et lui faire vivre surtout en expérimentant par lui-même et de façon collective les possibilités créatives du faire avec la matière. Donc aussi dans une démarche soutenable, parce que le point de départ était une matière en réemploi ou de faible transformation, et que ces matières, en fait, contiennent intrinsèquement un degré d'incertitude et dans leur mise en œuvre des savoir-faire expérimentaux. Donc en complémentarité avec l'atelier et les enseignements ex-cathédra, les étudiants développent leur sensibilité à la matière, en fait des affordances, en convoquant leur savoir et compétences acquis en théorie en situation réelle. Pour finir, ces diverses expériences pédagogiques, tout à la fois théoriques, pratiques et concrètes, permettent aux étudiants d'acquérir progressivement des aptitudes de confiance dans la capacité du projet, de la matière, des usages, à orienter de façon vertueuse leur travail de bricolage, dans le sens noble du terme, et de développer une perception écologique de l'environnement semblable à celle des jazzmen, pour interpréter les ressources dont ils disposent et non pas les commander à la manière d'un chef d'orchestre. Donc plutôt vers une improvisation individuelle et collective du projet. Ils acquièrent ainsi des réflexes, une réflexivité expérientielle quant à la mobilisation du contexte et des contraintes comme autant de ressources à la musicalité architecturale. Merci.
Our presentation analyzes the case of the travesías, poetic journeys across South America carried out annually by the studios of the School of Valparaiso. The central argument of our analysis is that one of the creative bases of the travesías is the relationship between calculation and uncertainty. We have structured our presentation in two parts. In the first one, we present two precedents of the travesías, the Falén and La Amereida, and in the second one, we present the travesías of the School of Valparaiso. The Falén. The poet Godfredo Iomi formulated the Falén as a mode of poetry in action made by all. To carry out a Falén, Iomi brought together a group of actors, visual artists, philosophers, and poets to depart on journeys across cities and fields. In the Falén, the peripeteia of the journey becomes a relevant element with respect to its calculation. Moreover, the Falén incorporates as a valid option the accidents and unforeseen turns. For Iomi, I quote, "Chance is not necessarily improvisation. It is quite another thing. It is eruption and opening." This statement indicates the heart of the Falén's poetic proposal, to produce an opening in the world. Iomi advanced that to produce an opening, the Falén required a poetic calculation. During a Falén, the participants held poetic acts in which the poet asked each participant for a word to articulate a poem made by all. The designer Silvia Arriagada points out that although Iomi allowed each participant to, I quote, "give way to desires and intentions in light of the verses," the syntax he created by adding the connectives in the sentences maintained a strict calculation that aimed to uncover the obvious of the words as far as meaning, providing them with sense. In the same way as the poetic calculation revealed a new sense to the words in the poem, it also revealed a new sense of the place by indicating a singularity. In this way, following the opening instance of the poetic word, the participants of the Falén carried out what they called a sign, which was a plastic intervention that marked the newly revealed sense of the place. The calculation-uncertainty relationship determined the realization of the sign, as it embodied the eruption of the unprecedented reality willingly revealed during the poetic act as a result of its calculation. For this reason, Iomi points out that in the Falén, I quote, "One is chance. Chance is not there or here, nor is it the involuntary encounter of a circumstance or the strange chord of something unpredictable. In the Falén, one carries chance with oneself." La Amereida, or first travesía. In 1964, Iomi formulated Amereida, a poetic vision of the American continent that asks about its origin and possible destiny. The poetic calculation of Amereida proposes that this continent appeared in the world as a finding, not a discovery, recognizing in its emergence a condition of gratuity or donation. As such, Amereida envisioned the continent as an unknown yet to be revealed. To reveal the land from its condition of gratuity, Iomi proposed La Amereida, a Falén on a continental scale across South America. In 1965, La Amereida departed from Tierra del Fuego, crossing the continent towards Santa Cruz de la Sierra. The journey also required calculation, where the inventory and preparations aimed to enable its artistic adventure. Following the formula of the Falén, the group held poetic acts, opening different places to the possible destination and building in them a sign as an act of donation. Those who participated in the journey refer to these signs as a, I quote, "work hic et nunc," let us say improvised, which means made right there, not without preparation and with all the required time. The phrase hic et nunc, here and now, shows that the way of understanding improvisation was far from being an arbitrary and hasty act. On the contrary, improvising was proposed as a way of proceeding whose preparation allows us to attend to the emerging present of the place, collecting the singularity of its new sense revealed by poetry.
The second part of the presentation revolves around two travesías, in which we can see the relationship between calculation and uncertainty in the journey and work. The Travesía to San José de Chiquitos, Bolivia, 2015, and Travesía to Rio Grande, Chile, 2016. Every year, the studios travel through America performing poetic art and work. At the Falén in La Merida, the travesías require calculation that allows the creative adventurer to pursue through the criteria of the journey. I quote, "The calculation tries to ensure that its preparation and sequence realization exclude any possibility of vicissitude in order to achieve a poetic architectural adventure." The studio devote themselves to calculation of travesías, during a determinate and finite period of time. During this time, the studios arrange themselves into a specific and dependent task group, converting the travesía in a common project. Each one of these groups focuses on recurrent aspects needed to support life, study, and work in the relevant state. The relationship, calculation, uncertainty runs through this group. Although they foresee essential dimensions of travesía, they must also consider the uncertainty of the journey. That's why the calculation doesn't end in the travesía. It is a sustaining state. As soon as the travesía starts, theories are verified or refuted. What differs from what was proposed question the calculation of travesía. It is the interaction between the predeterminate and the reality of the place. The ability to think and construct in a creative environment that mediates between the determination of the calculation and the indetermination of the place give the project an open condition. Every travesía involves the construction of a piece of architecture, design, of art that is given to the place and its inhabitants. The relationship between calculation and uncertainty is also evident in this work and its layout, as can be seen in the work of Travesía to San José de Chiquitos, 2015. Given the large number of people in the travesía and their travel, the storage of the book's privileged personal luggage, leaving the material of the work behind. Once there, the layout conceived in Chile by the studio meets the reality of the heavy and hard Amazonian woods. As a result, the default layout changes when it encounters the new maturity of its elements, which become pillars in a comic layout. The work of travesía are light in nature. That is, they may lack many dimensions to ensure the permanence. In this sense, a work of travesía can become ephemeral. Its meaning is not lodged in its duration, but in its donation. Given the limited time available for the construction, the studios can elaborate fragments before the part. In the Travesía to Rio Grande 2016, the student constructed abstract three-dimensional cubes as a prefabricated model of the work during the Travesía. Although role was not yet determined, the studio already had a unit of the work. The placement of the pillars and the role of these prefabricated models was decided in situ. The experience is a clear manifestation how the pre of the Travesía encountered the here and now during the journey. Finally, after analyzing the relationship, calculation, and uncertainty, the Falén, La Merida, and the Travesías, we can argue that this created action through the peripetia into the opportunity of the traits. The opening emerged from the chains we carry with us, as the fully voluntary and intentional search for elicit the unveiling of a new meaning. La Merida and Ik Eknuk finds through the American continent give account of this attempt. Signs that emerge from the new sense of the place opened by a poetic art to a possible destination. The participant of the creative action take that opening as an indication of a certain possibility from which to conceive and materialize the work. Then, the work is not the result of the imposition of the predetermined project, but the emergence of a material order conceived from the condition of the here and now. This way of generating the work from the Poetic opening leads architecture to outline a way of proceeding that distances himself from the planning and approach in a way of thinking and doing in the present, integrate emerging reality of the place. Thank you for your attention. Shared at Shapwell, Thinking Around the Building. This paper is a reflection on our project titled Shared at Shapwell, in which a collaboration between Drawing Matter and ourselves, Maria Chiara Piccinelli from PIM Studio, a practicing architect and lecturer, and myself, Corinna Dean from ARCA, and lecturer and researcher, and a group of students and practicing participants who carried out an on-site workshop to construct the shed itself. So the beginning of the project was triggered by a drawing in the Drawing Matter archive by the British architect James Gowan, titled Tool Shed, from 1977. The original orthographic drawings were reinterpreted firstly through a series of online sessions and then meeting on site for a one-week workshop carried out at Shapwell Farm in Somerset. Drawing Matter has collected a highly original archive of architecture drawing and models, as well as creating an ongoing program of interpretive work, demonstrating a critical stance in exploring architecture and his representation. The dialect of drawings and its relationship to architecture is explored, critiqued, and celebrated. One such drawing, which surfaced from the collection, is called Tool Shed and came from a folder labor list project. Near Hub House, Drawing Matter's collection speculates about the shed's origin. We initially thought it was an unbuilt part of an early Stirling and Gowan island of White House, in part because it is often an account of the floating concrete foundation on a sand dunes. When the workshop project was underway, we approached James' daughter and various colleagues who had worked in the office, Tony Fretton, Paul Notley, and the historian Bart Grayson. The consensus was that it more likely related to a teaching studio project at the Architecture Association from the early 70s. It remains a compelling yet unsolved mystery.
The drawings, which depicted the building only from two elevations, provided no clues as to the site and context. The drawings depicted a building made of breeze blocks and a timber door with an angled window. Our project was to interpret Gowan's concept as represented through the drawings. This allowed the participants to build a narrative around the building and to open up spaces of interpretation. These avenues were crucially acted out in the making process. So although we had a drawing, it acted almost as a palimpsest or a ghosting of the structure's concept. To reference the anthropologist Tim Mingold, critiques the predominance of the concept as driving the design. Quotation marks. The artifact is the materialization of a thought. So in order to make something, you first have to think it, or hold that thought at the forefront of your mind when you are making it. This leaves out the idea of process of ideas and creativity through the flows and transformation of materials and the movement of imagination in the sensory narrative.
In the workshop, we attempt to overcome this idea of projecting the concept through the drawing, but allow the process and making to in part become the shed. The process of drawing to build structure allowed the group to explore how ideas and creativity are given from through the transformation of material from a collective process. The build project, which when constructed was a manifestation of walls, floors, and roof, following a trajectory from the drawing to his ongoing relationship to the site, a life beyond the fine
the final construction activity. As architects, practitioners, participants working in the period of Anthropocene, we attempt to lead with an inquiring practice, which considers the responsibility of the specification of materials and design in this era, the embodied energy involved in the making of the materials, as well as the technical ideas of forms and mass, were important consideration in the process of making the shed. We hope to inspire and jolt the process of making through intuitive interaction between understanding of machinery and inspire to open up the maker to thinking of applying their own intuitive process as an extension of the material. Simply put, we're making a shed using a drawing as a form of guidance. In the words of Amiter, one of the participants, gathering a shattered farm for the construction of the shed, resolve and resolving went hand in hand as we feel the details of Cohen's drawing and brought it to life.
On an ontological level, the shed is described as the annex to the primitive hut, the auxiliary for the excesses of human life. Sheds are the buildings freed from architecture, and perhaps for that very reason, can teach us about it. In the 1955 edition of Essai sur Architecture, Abbé Marc-Antoine Laugier provides a drawing of the primitive hut. For Laugier, the primitive hut represents the first architectural idea. It's an abstract concept. While it is an imaginary house, it has an important meaning because it is an emblem of material construction, well-being, and the art of dwelling. This description of being an emblem of material construction resonated throughout the workshop, reminiscent of building a large piece of furniture where tactility between the building and ourselves and being are always present. Godfrey Sempers' The Four Elements of Architecture, 1851, explores the origins of architecture through the lens of anthropology. The book divides architecture into four distinct elements: the hearth, the roof, the enclosure, and the mound. In constructing the tool shed, this distinction of elements allowed us to work collaboratively and efficiently. The distinction of these elements was represented through Gowan's drawings representing a hearth, which was a modest stove, the roof, a discrete flat roof, which we later planted up with pond plants, the enclosure, a defiant protrusion, and finally the mound, the plinth, which provided the structure with a platform to announce its presence on the ground.
As discussed before, our reading of the shed was derived from a set of 2D drawings and an attempt to understand its potential location and purpose. The final construction was not a reproduction by any means, but rather an interpretation to an analysis of the form. The drawings represent a structure which, although diminutive, commanded an aggressive stance with its ziggurat upper half stacked forward. The shed made no nod to any idealized form of the archetypical shed of pitched roof or symmetry. In the call for the participant, we asked for an interpretation of the shed in a drawing form. The workshop, which comprised about 13 participants and 3 preliminary meetings online, as the group was dispersed across the UK and abroad. In these meetings, we discussed the details of the construction, the purpose of the shed, and the key functions which were expressed by open the store, cold shoot, and a cold shoot. We attempt to imagine from this observation the use and the environment of the shed.
Construction methods were examined to explore how to stack the recycled Jara railway sleepers, which had a dense grain and would burn through the wood miser blades at an alarming rate. The offcuts were used as flooring tiles with experiments in infill materials. Conversations around the construction centered on if we were stacking or interlocking the sleepers. Our means of being able to construct a wall emerged through testing and experimenting with the material on site, eventually rejecting various approaches such as dowels to introduce coach screws in order to connect each sleeper.
So what were our intentions in constructing an interpretation of the drawing? Evidently, we thought through the issues of environmental awareness when accessing the original material, which was the concrete breeze block. We introduced sleepers to replace the breeze blocks, but maintain the row numbers. The courses, but as the sleepers were large in dimension, the construction grew in height. Hophouse describes the drawing.
We cut this part.
Okay, so formally, the siting of the shed within the cluster of evolving farm buildings embeds its presence. The site is a working site, not a park of static pavilions, of pavilion buildings to be interacted with in a contemplative way. Rather, a relationship in which the buildings housed or respond to an agricultural function. In the case of the workshop, the designers were the makers, akin to the construction of a bespoke large-scale piece of furniture, where each piece was assembled by the group, who would drift somewhat seamlessly from wall to ground to roof group. As the participants prior to the workshops were unknown to one another and came from varied backgrounds, the intensity of the interpretation and moving from design to built form became more immediate, 6 days to construct. The integration into the project became immediate with positive interactions amongst the participants. Amy Tay poetically sums up this interaction. A diverse bunch with varying levels of experience and confidence, we were immediately confronted with the need to find a common language with which to fruitfully think and make together. Quite the obvious observation, but words, hand gestures, and rough sketches were as much our tools as the sawmill and power drills. We often talk about architecture education as being an iterative process, going backwards and forwards between model, drawing, concept, intuition, accidents, but making through doing is not at the fore. The workshop allowed us to explore the making process with the limitation and idiosyncrasies of the materials. In addition, it demonstrated the importance of skill to be able to use the machinery or tools to shape and guide the making. Through a degree of improvisation and collective making, it allowed the work to be de-authored, allowing an exchange of thoughts and making the tools to play a role. Turning to Tim Ingold's thoughts explored through Making and Growing, 2014, in particular, his exploration of how making is central to the process of design. Although we work from an original drawing with the envelope of a building, I would propose that it is here that through improvisation, collectively finding a common language, that we began to think through making rather than making through thinking. So making is no longer a projection of a concept onto a structure or the projection of form onto matter. Instead, decisions and with it knowledge was built up throughout the process. Therefore, a building emerged which was probably very different from any concept originally imagined. As a result, our thinking through making began to generate a form of knowledge which expanded on the centrality of approaching a design, less through a projected concept onto material, and more a backwards and forwards movement of drawing, making, conversations, and testing. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Big thanks for the presentations. And following the program, we will take 10 minutes break and we come back with the round table session speakers moderated by Gili Traganou, Georgia Mantopoulou, Paulo Dam, and Anna Betancourt. We will take 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we are on time. Thanks so much for the presentations. So, roundtable session speakers, moderated by Gilly, Georgia, Paulo, and Anna. We can start. And we have a question for Corina Dean and Maria Chiara. It says, wonderful project and presentation. Where the material sourced, form, and at which point of the project were they included? Apologies if this was explained in the presentation. The sound of my device is poor. Corina, I didn't see Corina. She's not here. No, she's not.
Are the speakers not here at this point?
No, not Corina and Maria Chiara. So we don't have an answer.
Perhaps there are some other questions for other speakers. Anna?
Thank you very much, all of you, all of the presenters. I start with a question to Nicolas Atelier and Michel Prégardien. Are you here?
Yeah, Michel is not with us, unfortunately, but yeah, I'm here. I'm listening.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm very interested in this notion of you raised the point about jazz not being the kind of not being related to the kind of Eurocentric vision of how to write music, and how the interpretation of jazz as being an improvisation as not being able to be transcribed in music notes. And I think this is such an interesting aspect. And in terms of the moment we are living today and the challenges and how to bring into the architecture discourse a critique and a more decolonized way of both translating, but also considering how we create new ways or new languages to understand and explore spatial conditions. I would be really curious to hear more about these notions and the thoughts that you had about the translation and the kind of act of analogy to jazz and this notion of not being in writing, but nevertheless this knowledge to being transferred and passed on within between musicians and within the music culture of jazz. I hope I understood the point right of your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was the thought of Christian Béthune, who, like I said, writes on this topic. And it's true that he says himself that it's not an Eurocentric way of thinking. So, like you say, the kind of decolonization of mind, to resort the ownership of work of art and jazz specifically, because it celebrates an oral transmission. And so I think, yeah, for us, it's really interesting because we speak about the project. There is a narrative, and also we do 2D representations a lot. And so we try to find ways to go beyond that. And the analogy that we found in jazz was especially on the way that you interact with other people and with the environment, your direct environment, and the way that you can be aware of opportunity and other people that you work with, opportunity of materials and stuff, like I said. So, and jazz is quite the same. Like we had in the first session, someone was speaking about that also, that it is a different domain, but there is for sure maybe less responsibility. But I think in a pedagogical way, it's kind of the same issue that we are facing. And so it's always for us really important to look at different domains like that to find inspiration. And it was funny because when I looked at the jazz critics like that, I found out that they used the same concept as ecological perception, which was written by James Gibson in the 70s, which is coming back in interest in Europe, I think, now, or at least in France, because it was translated some years ago, I think 5 years ago only. There was no translation of his work to those days. And so the Nila Born that I cited in my presentation talk also about that, about this kind of aptitude that mixed your capacity and the environment. And it's not one way around, it's both sides, and it's continuous transformation. So I don't know if I answer
thank you. What about your year? I think there are several hands raised.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for three very interesting presentations. I was very taken by this concept raised by Oscar and Isadora, focusing on the relationship between calculation and uncertainty. I think the tension between these two conditions is so important, both for any act, whether that's an architectural act or a political act. I think it's a very, very important condition. And what I have found very hard, and I don't know if you share this, is that it's actually quite hard to make others or students, people to feel comfortable in this relationship between calculation and uncertainty. So one of the questions I have is how does one enable others to feel confident in this tension? And what are the things that might need to be structured and designed that might not be of course, the outcome itself, because we associate the outcome with improvisation, some degree of uncertainty, it's an openness, it's unpredictable most times, or that's what I think most of us want to see here. But what are the things that we need to structure and design so outside of design itself, if I may say so. For example, how do we design and structure time, pace, the pace of a project, the intervals of projects, the duration, or how we may design and be very, very precise about the configurations of the team or of the ensembles. So in a sense, and this is a question for all three groups, where is the element of calculation and precise design, and how, because in order to achieve, I think, uncertainty or a greater degree of uncertainty, you may actually need a great degree also of control and of calculation in other areas of the project. And if any of you have any comments on that, perhaps starting from Oscar and Isadora, I think that will be great to hear. And how to enable others to believe in this.
Yes, hello everybody. Thanks for all the wonderful presentations. I can maybe start with one perspective on your question, Georgia, thank you. And then Isadora, I don't know if you want to join later. I think that maybe Nicolas has provided maybe with an answer to that. That I think that it has to do in some degree with presenting the experience as a game or with a dimension of like a ludic dimension or a playful dimension, which may allow others to be confident that the outcome it's in a sphere of where, let's say, that the uncertain outcome it's completely possible and it's okay and it's part of the whole construction. So I think that maybe approaching or thinking either the travel, in the case of the travesías, either the travel, maybe the life conditions or how you approach to the project has to do with the invention of a game dynamic or a playful dynamic that make the other approach with that sort of freedom of knowing that we're all in the same playground, let's say. And then also returning to the presentation of Nicolas, I think that there was this really interesting sentence that l'improvisation ne s'improvise pas. I think that for me it was it bring a lot of echoes with what we were thinking with Isadora, in the sense that I don't know how it's in English, but I mean, you can play the trumpet, let's say, or no? It also has that degree of the word play. I mean, you can execute the instrument, let's say, like, but you can play it also in the sense of a more playful thing. So I was trying to find in that sentence, like l'improvisation ne s'improvise pas. I was trying to find the positive form, let's say. So what do you actually do with improvisation? It could be like you play improvisation. So I think that would be for me an important part.
Can I say something about the improvisation also? I was trying to integrate it into my paper, and I eventually left it out because I thought it was more complicated than I thought in the beginning. So I read a little bit about jazz improvisation from jazz theory, and I found that technically what is happening, and maybe that's one of the ways in improvisation, is that there is always something, some of the instruments, as we all know, at the same time provide the stable backbone. And this stability is what allows the player who will improvise to really perform the improvisation. It's in the way they hold their back. So they support them and they don't let them fail. But they allow them to flourish and play and produce their own thing as soloists. And this alternates from one to the other. So there is a rotation happening. That's why we might have 3 or 4 improvisations or solos happening in the same piece. So I wonder in this work, what is this element that might keep this kind of backbone, the stability, so that improvisation happens? And this might be some kind of structure or like calculation that allows for this playfulness.
if I may say something. Yeah, I think it's like Oscar or Georgia, like you said, you have to have backbones. Actually, really, I think it's a lot of preparation to have to make the right ambiences and the right input to allow the playfulness then. and it's really hard to put the things between be too constrained and to let it do anything. But for jazz, like you said, for example, you have the background of your routines, and you play a lot, and then it permits you to go beyond when you interact with other elements, like I said, like people or in your environment. And I think for architecture, it's the same, but you have to permit that. So, like Oscar says, you have to make the students, for example, be comfortable with the site, with their capacity, their possibilities, and also the end of the activity, because it's really important. You have to have an end. Like for me, it's like it's good to have a goal, but you cannot say it will be like that. You have an objective goal that's not working. But the fact that you build something outside, that can be in a public area, public space, it's really motivating for the students. It's the point, the starting point, and then you also, for you as pedagogue, you have to find the confidence. For example, in La Louvière, I remember that at every beginning of each workshop, there was always a questioning from students, like it will not stay, it will fall, and we will not arrive at something at the end. And when the structure were building at the last day, they were really happy, and it's fun, and it's also like not an act, but also like a really an ongoing experiment during the activity. But you have to face how do you say that, doubt. You have to face doubt, and it's not bad. It can be fun to interact with students like that, like they are teasing you and you are teasing them, because you say, yeah, it will work, and they say, no, it will not work. And it's going like that, so it can be fun also.
Thank you. There are still some hands raised. Isadora?
Yes, I wanted to say something about the question or the answer that Oscar gave. Yes, I think from a student's perspective, the both travesía that we presented, I participate as a student, so I have this view in that. And I think it's really important that the student is not just like the player. They don't just go and travel with the taller and that, but they also participate in the construction and this calculation. So, for example, I do my part. I am in a group, and I do my part to support all this travesía, and my other companion do the same. So I think it's important answering the question about the trust in this is that I trust because I know what we are doing. So I am not going blind. I'm not blind in the project, in the process, but they are things that I trust that my classmates have decided, and the professors decide too. So it is like this collective improvisation that also have this collective backbone in a way. Yeah, so I wanted to say.
Thank you. I think Anna has a hand raised.
Yes, thank you. This is a question for Oscar and Isadora. I am also from Latin America, so I always have followed the work of Ciudad Abierta, and it was really wonderful to listen to your work. I have a question, because the origins or the emergence of Travesías with Lomi and also América Invertida, Torres Garcia, this is really a call to rethink the geopolitical orientation of Latin America. Do you see today in the Travesías you have carried out and the work you're doing a kind of this similar call or a relationship in the objects, constructions, narratives that you produce, a relationship to another way of reading the geopolitical context, the territory, or the spatial configurations in the work you do in relationship to indigeneity or the situation like Latin American sort of context itself in the work? Or is it more purely within the architecture and as a kind of own translation in the project itself? I don't know if my question makes the point, but I really want to see the kind of artists' ideas that were the origins of Travesías are the present today, and how do you see in the work that you're doing, how really the relationship of these spatial explorations have other narrative structures than the act of improvisation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Yeah, I think that I will try to answer from my own experience, because since this Travesías started in 1984, there's many generations of students and professors that have them carried out, and I think that probably their sense in some way, or their different facets they have also they have diversified, let's say. I don't know if changed, but diversified. But I think that there is one original question, we could say, which, at least for me, every time that I carry out a travesía remains the same, and it's the one of this sort of basal question of what is to be Americans. And I think that, of course, it's a question probably you cannot answer that question, or you can answer one day and the next day it might bring another thing. So I think that the whole construction of these experiences has this sort of bottomless reality, that if you approach the experience with that question, every time that you depart, you may find something different. You may I think that, in fact, the way of departing, let's say, the way of making your backpack and starting to prepare yourself for the travel, it's always returning to that question. And if that is the sense of the travesía, I will say that that remains, let's say, as a core fundamental. But I also think that they have develop different facets, I will say, for example, and that may depend also, of course, in the interest or in the work of maybe different professors. For example, when I was an assistant, I used to work with Rodrigo Saavedra, and he he was really focusing in those years and still now in, for example, visiting indigenous communities. And he was making this crossing between the whole question of what is to be Americans with that dimension of the American continent. And then you have all the travesias that have gone to big metropolis, to cities, not to isolated places, and others, like, for example, the ones of Ivan, at least during many years, he was focused on really isolated parts of the South. And the ones of the dad of Ivan were focused on also on the Patagonia and connectivity. So I think that you have this core that maybe will remain as this question, what is to be Americans? But you depart with that question, and then it can diversify an approach to different modes of looking at the continent and relating in that sense to the reality of the continent.
Wonderful answer, and I would love to talk more. Perhaps we have an opportunity in the future. That's very interesting. Thank you.
And we have one question in the chat from Christine. I don't know if Christine wants to say, or should I read it? It's for Oscar. Christine says that she loves the idea of fragility in the objects that travesia live on the different journeys. How do students prepare this project specifically compared to other solid projects they work on during their studies? Is there a consciousness of where, climate, and time?
Isaura, should we? You want to join, or
yes.
As you want?
But go first.
I think that there is maybe the fragility or the ephemeral condition that a work of travessia may have. I think it's related, well, with many things, but probably two are quite important. One is the calculation or what you are able to do in an amount of time with a limited budget, traveling, sometimes encountering things that you were not expecting. Like if you buy materials, for example, in some place and you realize that the wood, I think that one of the cases of that Isaura presented, deal with that problem, that maybe you have a certain kind of, for example, driller, and you realize that you are finding this Amazonian, super hard, difficult wood to work, and you have to completely change your approach to the project. So I think that one of the fragility, sometimes it's, let's say, there are, of course, many dimensions of an architectural project that are left momentarily at the side for a project of travessia. For example, the duration. And I think that will have to do with the budget and as I say, with the time and the energies, of, I don't know, 20 people, 30 people that you have to work on a project. And then the other will be the sense of the work of travessia, which we didn't develop that in the presentation, but it's in the article, that it has to do with this conception or relation with the continent from this condition of the gift of donation. So, and if the relation or the project is a gift, let's say, to the continent, then it's difficult when a gift is something that is not ephemeral, because if you don't want the gift, it becomes a problem. Let's say, if you build something, for example, with Rodrigo, this professor, which I used to work a lot, I remember we built in a Guarani community in the south of Brazil, a fireplace with a kitchen, and we did that. It was ephemeral in the sense that maybe in one day, if the community was actually not comfortable with the project, they could just destroy it or use it for another thing, use the material for other things. But what happened is that actually they received the gift and they decided to keep it. And years after, we received these photos of the project, quite transformed already, but still there, even if it was ephemeral in its origin. So I think that it has to do maybe with those two realities: the calculation from one side, in which the project it's done, and then the other one is the nature of the very project, which is a gift. So its ephemeral condition has to do with not transforming itself into a problem for whomever this project it's built.
Thank you. Very interesting interpretation of ephemerality in a social way. I see Georgia and Nicholas also having hands raised. Is it Georgia? You have a question? Yeah.
Yes, perhaps I was forming the question in my mind while Oscar kind of was half answering it, but maybe I'll change my question slightly. So I would be interested in the lasting effects of collective improvisations or collaborations, especially when the work is ephemeral. So where is the value? The exact value might not be in the object, but what is happening with the effects, the lasting effects on the collaborators themselves? Have you worked with groups again and again, or have the certain configurations of ensembles of people, led to other configurations in the future? So what I would be interested in kind of figuring out and hearing from your experiences so far, and that's again for both presentations, on whether the lasting effect of the work is not only in the built object or in the actual performative architecture, which has lasted, it's a short-term project, whether and how it influences the mode of practice among the collaborators, and does the work lead to other collaborations or other future practices being born from the practice from your own practices? Do you see what I mean? Whether you've seen over the years groups emerging or modes of practice emerging from the people who have participated there.
Yeah, I will try to answer that. I think that it's a really complex question, and I don't know if I could say something outside my experience. Once again, as a student, I think that the work of Travesía and the Travesía itself, say you travel with other people, and you encounter yourself with the inhabitants. And I think many times they can be deep relationship, but sometimes it can be as ephemeral as the work. And I don't think that that's bad or good. It's just a reality. But in the group itself, the student, they have many experience. My time it was 5 Travesías, more or less. And you travel with many people, and sometimes with the same people. And I think that you can start you start to find your place, in a sense, that sometimes someone is in charge of, for example, the food, or for example, the route, and you start to find what you are. I don't want to say your place, because it is like you fit there and you cannot fit anywhere. But I think it's important, maybe in the relationship as a whole. I don't know if I have answered, but like
I guess my question is, and then have you observed instances where certain configurations of students later on, a few years later, might start forming their own collaborations and their own practices? Or is that something, because that would be an incredible influence of the work on not particularly the particular site or the particular community or the particular thing that has been produced, but an influence on how people will practice in the future. So I'm talking about what happens with the students later, and what happens with the students. Is it different? To what extent it is different than students from other schools who work more conventionally?
If I may, I will switch in French for a bit. En fait, on a eu, à la suite de ces expériences-là, on a eu des étudiants qui se sont orientés vers le réemploi, par exemple. Donc, il y a tout un développement au niveau de structures, justement, qui peuvent aider les architectes et travaillent les architectes pour mieux réemployer les matériaux. Donc, c'est toute une filière qui est en mise en place. Et donc, on a, par exemple, quelques étudiants qui se sont orientés vers ce type de pratique. Et en fait, ça n'a pas concerné que les étudiants. Par exemple, on a eu aussi des professionnels qui sont venus en tant qu'intervenants sur les workshops, qui trouvaient qu'en fait le lieu justement d'échange comme ça, très horizontal, et où chacun donne des idées, où en fait ça, pour eux aussi c'était un terrain d'expérimentation. Et donc en fait ils se sont intéressés à ça et se sont dit, ah, ça serait bien qu'on inclue une petite partie quand même, qu'on essaye, parce que bon, il y a l'aspect financier évidemment toujours qui est compliqué pour une agence, mais qui essaye d'inclure une partie recherche dans leur fonctionnement maintenant, et avec lesquels on collabore toujours d'ailleurs. Et puis le troisième impact, si on peut dire ça comme ça, c'est aussi par rapport aux ressources de matériaux. On a eu par exemple, avec les panneaux qu'on a utilisés au début, l'entreprise qui les stockait, qui allait les jeter par exemple, maintenant les commercialise. Donc il y a quand même des petites choses comme ça qui se passent à la suite de ces expériences-là, et qui sont pas du tout attendues, hein. Pas du tout quelque chose dont alors, ça faisait pas du tout partie de la démarche, mais effectivement, oui, il y a quelques retombées comme ça. Et pour compléter ma réponse d'avant et faire suite à Oscar aussi, ça c'est plus pour l'aspect pédagogique, mais mettre les règles du jeu au départ, parce que je me suis rappelé après, les règles du jeu, comme on a pu les mettre par exemple dans l'atelier, ça c'est effectivement quelque chose qui engage vraiment plus facilement les choses, qui se détachent de leur œuvre, entre guillemets, quoi. Ils se détachent de leur production personnelle, et ils entrent effectivement dans ce jeu. On leur donne des contraintes comme ça, complètement arbitraires, comme je disais, et en fait, du coup, ça leur permet de se détacher de leur bébé, quoi. Même si on est tous attachés à notre création, évidemment, quelque part, mais là, elles deviennent plus facilement collectives. Je voulais rajouter ça par rapport à tout à l'heure.
I think that in the case of of the profile, let's say, of students that leave the school already as architects, as you say, I don't know to what extent these answers that I will give you actually belong to the mark or imprint that the experience of the Travesía will produce in a student. Maybe because maybe it belongs more to the character of that person that will in any way reach that or kind of continue their own professional career in those terms. But I've seen that from one side, many of, for example, my colleagues, people with whom I studied, it was quite common to leave the city and go to quite isolated areas, geographical areas in Chile, to work in municipalities where you actually, you need an architect that can design a project, but you actually need an architect that can calculate what a project requires to exist beyond the design, the resources, the connections, to let's say move all the necessary pieces and the energies to make that project a reality. So I think that there is like this profile, if you could say, of a student that's able to work, for example, in a municipality in the Patagonia and can do it very well in that sense. Then I will say that other students also in architecture, but also quite a lot in object design, that they approach a lot to this dimension of that also Nicolas spoke about, of the craft of manufacturing with your hands. So people that find this area, let's say, in the discipline where you conceive things and you also build them. I think that would be another one. And then for the collective dimension in their own practices, I've seen and I follow, I track students that I know that they are working together, but there I don't know if it's because of the Travesía or it's actually because they were companions and work together. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting, this double expansion of the profession of the architect, as was described now through this conversation. On the one hand, going out also in the earlier stages, like in connection to policy and politics, and on the other side, going towards the craftsmanship and building. I wonder more about the relation between the building and the architecture. Of course, probably we all do not accept this division of labor of the architect being only the one who conceives and designs and then having some building hands, on the ground. And we would prefer to see the architecture being directly connected with the actual realization of a building. At the same time, there are very specific professional people, or maybe not necessarily having a professional degree on that, but there are people who work on that, they're builders. So how do we consider this labor of the builder? Do we see this type of learning of the architect informing the building profession in a different way? And what happens where the architect goes to the site as a professional, not in the educational context, but in an actual world context? Does the architect relate in a different way? And do the architects enrich the profession of the builder? And as builder, I would think of a very broad, again, definition. We have builders which are used like laborers coming, with sometimes undocumented migrants working as laborers in a building site. And then we have also some people who are professionals by training, like the journeyman in Europe, in Germany, or in Scandinavia, which are people very, very dedicated to the craft of building. And they really know it. It's like a tacit knowledge, a second life for them. So there is a variety in this profession of the builder, from the laborer to a more conscious and reflective, builder. How does the architect relate with this profession that really exists in the world and has also a lot of problems?
Je vais continuer en français. En fait, dans une partie de l'expérience que j'ai évoquée avant, quand je disais professionnel, c'est pas que des architectes. On a eu le cas effectivement de spécialistes, par exemple des spécialistes de construction terre crue, des spécialistes de la construction en pierre. Et en fait, eux dont je parlais aussi, c'est-à-dire qu'ils se sont retrouvés à mixer leurs techniques, chose qu'ils n'avaient jamais fait. Et donc, ça leur permettait aussi justement de rentrer dans l'improvisation et de pousser un peu leur pratique. C'est ce qu'ils nous ont dit à la fin de l'activité. Ça, c'est un exemple. Et pour continuer dans ce type de matérialité, justement, qui m'intéresse, c'est que c'est aussi une façon de revaloriser des emplois de construction, justement, parce que ce soit par exemple en réemploi, ça permet d'employer une partie des gens qui n'ont pas forcément beaucoup de formation, y compris pour la construction, à la valorisation des matériaux déjà utilisés. Et avec le fait que ces emplois sont vraiment valorisés, puisqu'il y a aussi un aspect vertueux, écologique avec ça. Et, donc, et dans l'aspect artisan dont je parlais avec la terre et la pierre, c'est aussi des savoir-faire et des emplois qui sont également revalorisés. Donc, c'est aussi un aspect effectivement qui est super intéressant.
Just taking a word that Nicolas said, I think that I've noticed that the people that I know that have followed, let's say, that path of approaching to being the builder or the constructor, they sort of the word that Nicolas said was specialist, and I have the impression that the people that I know that have followed that path, in some way they fall in love with one material or with one technique, and they sort of they start to, for example, to do wood panels for acoustic solutions, and they just they kind of focus their whole practice on that, or in earth construction, or in wood, or in a certain kind of module. So I don't know if when architects follow, if they all do that, or maybe the craftsmanship requires that from a person to kind of have to choose something. But for the people that I know, that architects that have decided to go that path, they sort of fall in love with something, and then they persevere in that.
There's a question on the chat from Christine. I don't know if you saw it, Anna and Julie.
Yeah, we already asked this question.
Ah, okay. Sorry.
I think Anna has a question. Or
well,
Anna has her.
Sorry. So, listening to both of your presentations, or both Nicolas, Michelle, Oscar, and Isadora, there is both this very strong departure from the conditions of the site and the context and the relationship of whether it's the travesías or the projects that you described, Nicolas. But there is also very interesting, the last comment you did, Oscar, about the material conditions, the materiality and the material conditions as such. And I was thinking, it's in architecture education, traditionally, what is prevalent is very much this prevailing idea of the concept prior to the materialization or to the material condition. And I think the act of the hands and the making is so present in both of your projects and your work. And I was thinking, how can we enable these experiences, both the translation, negotiations, improvisations, calculations, to articulate this knowledge production that happens in your projects to actually inform not only your experiences, pedagogical experiences, but rather to rethink architecture education, because we need to actively rethink architecture education today, not the least because of the challenges we are meeting, which are so urgent and imminent. And perhaps the act of making and the act of some of this that I think Georgia was touching in the very beginning about calculations and uncertainty, and how do we work with this, and how we can transfer that knowledge to others. I think it would be, it's not a question, but I'm just curious how you think around that, because I am very interested in architecture education as being an educator, and how do we take that with us and shake a little bit the foundations of those curriculums that we are forced to, or those structures of teaching that very much is predominant in so many institutions.
Can I add the layer here? We see a lot, at least in the US, of making centers emerging in architecture schools, and they have very specific types of fabrication. Maybe you can relate your answer also with the particular practice of the making center that we see happening a lot.
Could I add something here? I know somebody's preparing an answer. We also see in the UK and perhaps elsewhere, architecture schools creating links with making facilities outside the architecture school, facilities that are in a small forest or in a farm, or making facilities that are closer to some of the work that has been presented, today. So the school, we're seeing this effort of actually making in locations. So let's say, let's call it, place-based making, which is not happening within the constraints of the school. There are advantages and disadvantages, but it will be interesting to hear from the presenters what they think about this, whether there's a shift, a positive shift towards this type of learning. Perhaps it has been influenced by the environmental crisis, I think, but perhaps there's something that is in our context that forces people to, and educators to think in this way, and decentralizing, processes of making and learning outside the school, and expanding the school, extending the school, to other places. It seems that it's happening more than it used to, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something, or more, at least in the UK. I'm not sure what others could add to this.
I think that trying to merge the three comments, I do perceive that there might be a reconfiguration from understanding let's say the School of Architecture or the university in that matter as a close community, a kind of a close academic community, and advancing towards the idea that actually the school, it happens in this constellation of different communities. Some are academic, some are external. And in that sense, in particularly our school, I think it has its story as a school. It's in this constant attempt of finding these configurations in which it's not only the school, but there is also, for example, a community of life, let's say people living in a place that it's related to the school, but it's not the school. Or with the travesias, that you relate with different communities that are also from outside the school, and then can maybe provide a place or a project. And finally, I think that at the bottom end, I could see the school as, let's say, a build work. It's a school in itself, like a project, it's a school. And then with its embedded knowledge and with the opening fields of study each time, for each project you need to study something, you need to open a research field or a knowledge field. And then the next project will do the same. So I kind of see that maybe these communities, they organize around one project, and then you go to the next project with the same or different communities, and then to the next, and then to the next, and finally let's say the life of the practitioner or of the architect will go from project to project, in which each project is in some way the school, if you understand the project as this constellation of communities around it, that not necessarily are the School of Architecture belonging to the institution, to a university. Yeah.
Okay, Nicolas, he has a question.
Je voulais compléter aussi la réponse de Oscar, mais répondre un peu à la question d'avant, c'est qu'effectivement, dans tous les cas, il y a forcément un lien avec la crise écologique, et donc qui force à reterritorialiser les choses, qu'elles soient matérielles ou humaines, y compris l'université, évidemment, et les différentes pratiques. Ça, c'est obligatoirement le cas. Enfin, en tout cas, si on s'intéresse un peu à l'actualité, surtout en ce moment, aussi avec la COP26, mais oui, c'est obligatoire. Et donc, ma question va suivre ça aussi, c'est comment on peut réimaginer ça, comment on peut remettre des narrations avec ça, parce que je crois que c'est un peu le but, enfin, j'ai l'impression de un peu toutes les présentations qu'on a eu la chance d'avoir pendant ce colloque. Et donc, moi, ma question était par rapport à Oscar et peut-être à Georgia aussi, c'était par rapport à l'aspect politique. En fait, il y a ce lien entre la matière et le corps, et surtout dans vos deux présentations, à la fragilité aussi qu'il y a, et donc et trouver une certaine fluidité aux choses. Et donc dans nos recherches à nous, dans les liens qu'on fait, il y avait le jazz et il y avait aussi tout cet aspect de structure ouverte. Donc on a regardé un peu du côté d'Umberto Eco et on s'est dit oui, en fait ça c'est pas mal, mais il faut effectivement le lier aussi à l'expérience humaine. C'est peut-être un peu, si on mixe un peu les deux, c'est peut-être ce qui marcherait aujourd'hui justement pour des nouvelles narrations. Donc partir d'œuvres ouvertes, mais moins abstraites, donc en les liant à une certaine matérialité. Et voilà, donc c'est un peu l'impression que j'avais, enfin les questionnements que j'avais en regardant les deux présentations. Le paradoxe qui se pose entre poétique et précision. En fait, on parle de précision poétique et j'aime beaucoup ce terme. Voilà, je ne sais pas si les intervenants peuvent parler de ça, de précision poétique. Je trouve ça vraiment parlant pour eux.
Ivan.
Yes, we think that an architect knows a little bit of many things. It's not an he knows many things, but a little bit. I agree with Nicolas' definition that the architect is an orchestra director, we could say. In the project, we need to work with many others, and then in the execution, many others also. In Travesías, we try to bring experiences to acquire different type of knowledge, not just the projection one. If we think we pass we spend at least 10 or 15 days living, working, and studying together with the students. We say we are not teachers. We have more experience. So I think that if we, like architects, if we want to have an idea of a project, it's necessary to know everything about the material world. Not only concepts and not only concepts, if not how much heavy it's a piece of steel or wood, how it brights with the light, how is this surface. There are many knowledge different than we acquire in the studies. So mainly we think that the experience with materials, reading the place, we must think that in Travesía we live many days in the place in which we do something. In the place, there are many inhabitants, no? Not only people. There's a singular wind, climate, sun. So there are many factors that you must read, understand to propose something. This reading of the place is made by all, no, not only teachers, no. We do collectively, and then we propose collectively also. Students propose. We finally it's a common reading and a common proposition and a collective construction. In this sense, in Chile, we have many areas, many places out of the cities in which architects must act, you know, and materials, take local techniques, local knowledge, is logistics. To have materials on the place is not so easy. It's very complex. So in this sense, I say that an architect must know many things, but a little bit. Well, more or less.
May I come here just to, I think that's a beautiful description, Ivan, and I liked also what very much what I think Oscar or maybe perhaps Nicholas I like that definition that the project is a school, and in this situation, as you just described it, Ivan, then both teachers and students, all of them are learners. They're all learning. And I think this is why this, in my mind, this is why collaborative place-based projects are so exciting, because everyone in the group, the hierarchies perhaps break, and everyone in the group becomes a learner as much as a doer and a teacher, because the teacher also doesn't know what exactly will happen, and I find that this type of projects, they have a fascinating kind of character, because they're neither projects that we can just locate in education or in practice. They sit somewhere in between. You know, they're not in the school. They're not because they're not a practice yet as professional practice or as post university practice, but they work their structuring is somewhere in between, I find. And so they mediate very well the world of academia and the world of professional practice. That's my thinking about it. But thank you very much for your very valuable and inspiring work.
Thank you.
Miguel Eikem, which is one of the founders of our school, used to say something really similar to express that condition of this relationship between the professor and the student in this kind of context or studios, which was that the taller or the studio was composed by younger students and older students.
Exactly.
Yes, I would just like to add that what Ivan was saying about knowledge and what people need to know to do the project is something that goes back to Vitruvius, who says that we need to know a little bit about everything. And that's the difference between us and engineers, because engineers know everything about nothing, and architects know a little bit about everything. Do we?
Somebody asking a question. Pamela Arredondo Melendez is asking a question in the chat. I just wanted to point that out.
That was Nicolas who had a question. Yes, but I think he asked it. No.
Ah, all right. Sorry.
Yeah.
Now, are we going to have Carlos or no?
We have his letter that he sent us to finish the seminar with the poetic words.
Yes, I have his translation, and I can read that, but maybe we could project his text, which is really beautifully written. Can you share your screen, maybe, Ivan?
Did you see now?
Yes. Okay, so are we at the end now, or?
I think.
Okay, so Carlos Covarrubias is a faithful companion since the beginning of our collaboration. He's a poet. He's on the staff of the EAD PUCV, an amazing teacher and amazing poet. He's participated with us all the way along, and so I will just read the translation of his thing, of his poem, which is really quite beautiful and, as always, very poetic by definition, because he's a poet. So I'll read this now. I would like these final words of these 3 days around the common work in the experience now and here and now. Yeah, well, whatever. I would like them not to be of closing, but of opening, unlocking, words of opening that bring to the present the enthusiasm, the festivity. The real festivity that is born from the encounter where word and action dance, build, and celebrate. How can one not rejoice at bringing into play of that poetic condition that is not one's own? That condition so fresh, playful, tender, that brings us back to the intimate human rhythm of the humanity where creative peace flourishes. We can be and be recreated. At the right point, where it is possible to agree, consent, and conjugate the way birds fly in a flock. It is worth bringing up at this moment the words of a very dear poet. Come to the open, my friend, quote unquote. Precious invitation to the subtle unknown that sustains us, to that friendship that protects the adventure, to the grace of the doing and profiling itself in the work. And finally, what stops us or could stop us in trying to that sort of flock, to take us to travel with pleasure each time, the mysteries that keep the open, quote unquote. A hug to all from Carlos Covarrubias.
Maybe I can read it in Spanish.
Yes,
the original language.
Please, yes.
Carlos would be pleased. Quisiera que estas palabras finales de estos 3 días en torno a la obra, en común en la vivencia, ahora y aquí, quisiera que no fueran de cierre, sino de abertura, abrientes, abriendo. Palabras de abra que traigan al presente el entusiasmo, la fiesta, la real fiesta que nace del encuentro, donde la palabra y la acción danzan, construyen, celebran. ¿Cómo no alegrarse ante la puesta en juego de esa condición poética que nos es tan propia? Esa condición fresca, lúdica, tierna, que nos devuelve el íntimo ritmo de lo humano, donde el florecer la paz creativa, podamos ser y estar recreados. En el punto justo donde es posible convenir, consentir y conjugar, al modo como vuelan los pájaros en bandada. Cabe traer en este instante las palabras de un poeta muy querido: ven a lo abierto, amigo. Preciosa invitación al desconocido sutil que nos sostiene, a aquella amistad que protege la aventura, a aquella amistad, a la gracia del hacer perfilándose en la obra. Y por último, ¿qué nos detiene o podría detener en intentar una suerte de bandada? Nos lleva a recorrer con gusto cada vez los misterios que cuidan de lo abierto. Un abrazo a todos, Carlos.
Ven al abierto, amigo.
Come to the open, friend. Well, we are at the end.
Thank you very much for these days.
We are at the beginning.
I will say, like David say, we are in the beginning. We hope that this seminar allows to construct a new relations, not only David and me, if not all of us.
Thank you.
Seminar.
Thank you very much. It was very nourishing. It's like a spiral, the new beginning.
Thank you all for your participation, your work, your patience. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
And congratulations to the organizers.
You belong to the organizers, Christine.
No, it's Ivan and David. And thank you also to the translators. Amazing work.
Yes, the translators are amazing.
Congratulations.
I agree.
Well, a pleasure to see all.
Okay, so meeting tomorrow, Ivan?
I don't think so, David. I will take a holidays for 1 week at least. Bye.
Okay,
all.
cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.